Well, it all began back at basic training in Kaunas. We wrote our applications there, as required, since we were all Komsomol members. After that we went through the medical commission. They checked our health, determined whether you were fit or not. I was classified as Group A, which meant I was fully fit for service. Seemed nothing special, all by the book. But even then there was a growing premonition inside me that things ahead would not be so simple. When it was time to leave, they put us on a plane. I remember that flight, an anxious silence in the cabin, everyone lost in their own thoughts. And then, over the seas, and you're in another life. While we were flying, our plane came under fire. The air grew noticeably heavier, and for the first time we felt that this was not basic training or an exercise, but real war. The plane had to land in Kabul. We stayed there for a while to catch our breath, and then they moved us by vehicles to Bagram. That's how my combat baptism began. The story sounds simple enough, but so many feelings stayed inside. I didn't even tell my mother where I actually was. In letters I wrote, "I'm serving in Mongolia, everything's calm, the nature is beautiful, camels run around, flowers are blooming." I wanted to spare her unnecessary worry. My brother was serving too, and once he asked the commander what field mail meant. The commander, without thinking, answered plainly, "That's Afghanistan." So my brother revealed my secret and told our mother. No matter how much I tried to hide it, it came out. I did my training in Kaunas, and it was really tough. We worked with classified equipment, learned how to handle machinery, and went through mountain obstacle courses. We even had a special slope they'd flood with water. You had to crawl up it on all fours with your rifle, scraping with your hands and feet. It felt like real hell, but those trials hardened us. Of course, all the airborne training was there too. Jumps, forced marches, firing drills, the full set. They prepared us well, so that it seemed you could get through any hardship. Then the moment of arrival in Afghanistan came. We landed at night. In that darkness and dust I unexpectedly met a man I had once jumped with in Belgorod. Imagine that, the world is small. He trained in Fergana, I trained in Kaunas, and fate brought us together in Bagram. We hugged, exchanged a few words, and that gave me confidence, as if I weren't completely alone in this new, burning environment. The heat was exhausting, of course. The air was dry, dust filled your nose and mouth. Yet at that time I still didn't feel what real war was. What can you say? The army is the army. Simple, they issued your gear, weapon, ammo, and off you go. But when they sent us into the mountains, everything then depended only on you. No one could say exactly how many rounds would be needed, so everyone tried to carry as much as possible. We tore open ammo tins, dumped the rounds right onto the bottom of the rucksack so the weight would be distributed evenly. Then we packed the field rations, equipment, and everything else on top. It wasn't greed, but sound calculation. In the mountains nobody will come and bring you ammo, and if it runs out, that's the end. So the rule was simple. Whatever you could carry yourself was your ammunition. Of course sometimes there weren't enough cartridges. After a long fight you might be left with literally a handful of magazines, and then you had to decide what to do next. Once, after a serious firefight, we actually had an excess of ammunition. No one wanted to carry heavy packs back down the mountain, and there was little point. We decided to use them wisely. We made tripwires and mined the whole mountain so the enemy wouldn't be able to walk through where we had recently held the line. Funny enough, years later an American woman wrote to me asking if we could be invited to demine that very mountain, that there was a secret still there. I chuckled then. Well, that was long ago, but the memory remains. Strangely enough, food in general wasn't a big problem. In the mornings we were almost always given milk porridge or buckwheat. Sometimes we even managed to get fresh loaves. It was unclear what they had been soaked in, but they stayed soft and edible, which was already a pleasure. When we went into the mountains, we took rations with us. Of course, they quickly grew tiresome, but amid constant marches and combat they were a real lifesaver. Water was harder. A 1-liter canteen was the maximum you could realistically carry. Any more and it became too heavy. If you were lucky, There would be a stream or irrigation ditch near the position, and then you filled up water in special RDV, those rubber containers with straps that you carried on your shoulders. We always dropped disinfectant tablets into the water afterwards. How much they helped is a big question. Almost everyone contracted malaria and hepatitis at some point. But you still had to drink. There was no choice. Finding flowing, clean water in the mountains was a rare stroke of luck. What was poured into your canteen was valued like gold. You guarded water down to the last drop, and every sip felt like a small victory. I swore to myself then, if I make it home, the first thing I'll do is open a 3-liter jar of juice and drink it without worrying about saving a single drop. One canteen, and that's it. You plan how to allocate it, for the morning, for the patrol, for an emergency. We held together like family because otherwise we wouldn't have survived. Covering approaches for each other, sharing the last ration, giving someone a warm jacket without thinking if it was regrettable. I remember Oleg Sumov. He caught the radio station though it was hit and sparking, standing up to his waist in the snow, firing back. I ran to the radio, someone covered me with fire. That was brotherhood, stronger than any oath. Now he's one of those with whom I have a simple, heavy friendship. Those who stood beside you in that moment are forever different people. In war there was no room for show. Simple things mattered. Who would catch you, who would throw a grenade through a window at the right moment, who would cover your retreat. There were trips to the Kishlak, for water, for medicines. The interpreter sat nearby and we negotiated through him, handed out pills and rations, exchanged kind words with women and children whom the medic examined on the veranda, and this somehow preserved a human face in that story. People complained about extortion, about some old man who rode a white donkey and collected tribute. Once I stood on post at night, looking at that silhouette, and the thought flashed through my mind, if I shoot, the whole life of that place will collapse, a massacre will begin, and it will change them and us forever. So we didn't interfere, we understood. They have their own survival rules, old fears and debts. Intervention sometimes brings only worse. I knew these people might fight for their own by day and at night could go to the enemy. So it was always hard to trust them fully. You had to keep distance and not relax even in warm company. You sensed all this in small things, in their glances, in how they smiled, and in how a mother of one of them later wept at the guard post. We climbed into the mountains, secured convoy routes, conducted reconnaissance, the usual set of tasks. Making paths, setting obstacles, observing and waiting for orders. Our first serious battle happened during Operation Magistral. We sat in Arak canals for 3 months holding the lines, each company performing its task. The 9th Company stormed Height 3024, the 8th held the adjacent ridge, and our command element was located a little below, coordinating comms and resupply. While we were climbing, the artillery observer's radio broke, a strap snapped. He sat on a rock for 5 seconds and the device hit the stone with a dull thud. We had to share our radio and keep comms between the 3 of us until a replacement arrived. The ascent was hard. We scrambled up steep slopes, our legs burned, our breath broke, but we kept going, because there was nowhere to retreat. At first everything seemed calm, and we were just deploying, laying sandbags, securing provisions, when at 3 in the morning the shelling began. Sporadic explosions, bullets whistling, the smell of burnt powder and rocks tumbling down. At first commands blinked over the radio, then shouting, then real panic. I shouted over the net, 8th Company, check in, and heard only fragments in reply because the lines were breaking and interference was strong. The 9th was nearby too, you could tell from the smoke and flashes, and soon they called the reconnaissance platoon. By the time they ran up our guys had time to fortify, but casualties were already mounting. Some slipped away into the dusk, some fell, and that sobered you more than any order. We tried to send reinforcements in, but there were no orders at first. The headquarters paused, as if measuring every decision with a pencil. By the time you go down, by the time you climb back, by the time you gather people, the situation changes, and help sometimes comes late. The signalman was killed, and we were immediately sent to replace him. The road there wasn't easy, a narrow ledge, rocks crumbling underfoot, and shards whistling from above. By the time we got there, we were out of breath, but had to jump straight into the fight. There was no time to think. At one moment a shell hit the rock right next to me, and the landslide buried me. The weight pressed me down so hard I even lost consciousness for a second. The guys rushed forward into the battle, and I was left under those boulders. When I came to, silence around, only a ringing in my ears. I felt something hot nearby, moved a bit, and saw a smoking fragment right next to me. I pulled my leg closer so it wouldn't touch. Then I crawled on my belly to a rock ledge to get at least some cover. Later, when the firefight moved further, they finally dug me out. Soldiers with shovels and bare hands cleared the rubble, pulled me out. My backpack with ammunition was immediately sent up so it wouldn't get lost. We needed every round. And I was carried down to the other wounded. They started pulling out those who were still breathing. I remember ending up in the tent next to Tsvetkov. His leg looked like a burnt-out cigarette but completely mangled. I pulled out a syringe with Prawda, injected him so he wouldn't suffer, and tried to cheer him up. "Come on, don't be afraid, we'll dance at your wedding yet." He gave a weak smile. But in the hospital Tsvetkov didn't survive. The wounds were too heavy, and the sheer cliffs made proper evacuation almost impossible. Only one helicopter pilot dared to fly in, a truly reckless man. The cliff stood like a wall, and he hovered right beside it, almost brushing the blades against the rock. The noise was deafening, but we started loading the wounded and the dead on ponchos. The chopper shuddered, the cliff right there, any wrong move, and that was the end. But he held the machine steady, and we managed to load the people. When the helicopter flew off, everything suddenly became quiet, unreal, as if after a storm. Recon brought back almost no reports at the time. We moved as if blind, knowing only that the area was dangerous, close to the Pakistani border. There were villages, civilians, could be mujahideen, could be locals just looking at us with suspicion. The tension never let go, not for a minute. Even when it seemed calm, we still slept on our flak vests, the rifle or field phone under the head instead of a pillow. Well, you could see it from the outside too. Visually, just a ledge to cross, then climb that rocky slope up the mountain. We were positioned a little lower, under the 9th Company, with the 8th Company stationed higher up. The ledge was narrow, the cliff almost sheer. I had to run forward, take out signal flares to establish communication, red rockets, to mark that the battle was ongoing, green ones, to get on comms. That was like breathing for all of us. If you didn't send a signal, you could be left in complete isolation, and then the company would turn into a blind target. And up there, on those slopes, they came. High on drugs, stripped to the waist, screaming their Allahu Akbar, descending as if without fear, without pain. There were mercenaries, locals too, but how many, no one could say for sure. It felt like a living darkness was moving toward you, faces flashing and disappearing in the smoke. They kept coming, not counting their losses. We'd repel one assault, they'd fall back. Again, and again they'd press onto the positions. The whole evening, the whole night like that, attack after attack. I even lost count of how many times we had to meet them with fire. Mortars were hitting us too, thankfully not as fiercely as they could have, but even so, sometimes they struck so hard the rocks poured down and it felt like the mountain itself was collapsing. Each man believed in his own way, otherwise you couldn't endure it. Some whispered prayers, others clenched their teeth in rage just to hold on. For me, there was a strange moment. I lifted my head to the sky, a cloud drifted by, and it seemed as if my mother smiled at me from up there. And I understood, I would survive, no matter how hard it got. It was anger that held me, stubbornness, and the faith that we weren't holding that scrap of rock in vain. By dawn, our helicopter finally came, and we were relieved. We rode down on the armor, and only there, for the first time in a long while, did we feel alive. Down below there was even a makeshift field bathhouse, hastily built, but for us it was like a resort, to wash off the dust, sweat, blood. After that came a lull, as if the earth itself exhaled. The operation was still underway, the convoy passed, but we no longer covered it. Our part there was over. I remember the moment the rock face exploded. The blast buried me under stones, both legs pinned. When I dug my way out and looked at my boots, they were like sieves, you could sift vermicelli through them. That's when I realized I'd miraculously stayed alive. For that wound, I was awarded an order. Then there was another episode when we found ourselves surrounded. They gave me a medal for that, because we had to call fire on our own position. It was a terrible decision, but there simply was no other way out. Later we climbed higher, to another mountain. There was already a fortified position there, stone breastworks, everything set up. We decided to settle there because hauling stones and building a new shelter made no sense. There was room, and at least some order could be felt. That's where the officers set up, took positions in the fortification. By the book, the soldiers immediately posted sentries, sectors were assigned, everything visible, approaches from all sides were watched. We sat and waited. The night was quiet, only the wind and the occasional crack of stones underfoot. And suddenly, in the silence, I heard shots. My heart jumped. The outer post had opened fire. A young soldier sat there, green as grass, just recently assigned to us. From his story later I understood. He thought the 9th Company was coming up in helmets. Night, darkness, shadows moving along the slope, and in the mountains everything is distorted. You can't tell friend from foe. I asked him, at least report immediately who's moving there, otherwise who knows? But who's going to explain things to a young soldier? He saw silhouettes and assumed they were our men. And when they came closer, it became clear, they were not ours. I only had time to slap the bolt, fire a burst, and that's how the fight started. It later turned out they had come cunningly, flanking us, climbed the upper rocks and began pressing us from above. From two sides they surrounded the platform, and we were like in a stone trap. Hell began. Where our machine gunner Gerasim sat, there was such a roar it seemed the metal was being torn apart. Belt after belt went out, and the Mujahideen kept coming and coming. The officers in the fortification held the defense. Everyone understood, there was nowhere to retreat. I had just gone to relieve my post, left the radio in the dugout, and at that moment a shell hit, a direct strike. The radio was smashed to pieces, beyond repair. Luckily I had a spare KB set with me, old, small, but working. I held it between two fingers, the comms hissed, while the squad leader called in fire on our position. Imagine the risk. Shells were falling literally a few meters away. Bobenko, our artilleryman, worked so precisely that the berm was only a couple of meters from us, and still he didn't hit us. It was a terrifying kind of beauty. The ground shook, rocks flew, but that very accuracy saved us. All night we had only one wounded. I told that young soldier, "Stay in cover, don't poke your head out, got it? If you want to see a fighter, you'll have time later. If you just stick your head up now, there won't be anything left to see." But he couldn't stand it. He looked out, and a fragment clipped through his helmet. Lucky it wasn't fatal, just a cut, blood flowed, but he lived. The fight went on all night, as if time had stopped. Bullets, tracers, explosions, everything mixed together. We even stopped counting how many attacks there were. One would roll in, we'd fight it off, immediately the next. By morning the fog began to lift, and only then did it become clear. The Mujahideen had withdrawn. The mountains opened up, the smoke settled, and against the rocks you could see, their bodies were scattered across the slopes. In our fortification stood a guy from Moscow, our sniper. Tired, his eyes red from strain, he just grinned. "Yeah, looks like the snipers did their job. They've all fallen back." And at that moment, as if on cue, I saw two Mujahideen running down the slope. So I'd never shot from a sniper rifle in my life. They handed me the rifle. I thought I'd give it a try. The first shot missed. The bullet went somewhere into the rock. The second shot was less lucky for him. I hit him right in the heel. He cried out, fell onto his knee, waved his arms, and then went limp. The guys immediately perked up. "Oh boys, we can take him prisoner," and went down to collect him. The whole group coordinated, moved down carefully, checking every outcrop. And down below, in the rock face, there were cut-out niches, something like caches. That's where we found Pakistani honey, thick, in clay jars, clearly smuggled across the border. There were also cartridges neatly stacked in boxes. It was obvious the Mujahideen weren't just hiding out, but had a whole underground depot. They even rode up on horses. I remember how the thunder of hooves echoed through the gorge. But when the battle broke out, we had to fire at the horses too. No one was spared. The animals fell nearby, while the Mujahideen scattered in panic. In the end, we managed to capture two of them. though we could have taken more, but the chaos didn't allow it. It was during that fight that I had to take the risk of calling fire on our own position. I knew that if we didn't stop them, they would crush us like kindling. The clash turned into a real slaughterhouse. Every shot decided who would live and who would remain there on the rocks. And then, after the withdrawal of troops, I still had more service ahead. I was stationed in Kirovabat for a while, then sent to Beresi, to the square, where things were also restless. And when the time came to return home, trouble broke out in Azerbaijan. The trains were jam-packed, we traveled with sheep, hiding however we could. There was the so-called Tehran train. It went through Belgorod, through Kharkov. We changed at Torzhok, then kept going until we crossed the borders. I remember somewhere near Kharkov we changed into military uniform so it would be easier to travel calmly, and only then headed toward Belgorod. We made it to Belgorod, and there they simply kicked us out, like, "From here you're on your own." I tightened my boots and started walking home, step by step. My service had lasted 2.5 years, even a little more, 2 years and 4 months. All that time in dust, blood, in foreign mountains, and I returned home like a boy again, barefoot, on my native soil. And then I came up to the entrance. As always, the old ladies were sitting on the bench, cracking sunflower seeds. I quietly said, "Sure, aunties." I didn't want a fuss. And my mother, when she saw me, ran straight at me, crying, clutching me around the neck, holding on as if afraid to let go. That's when I truly understood for the first time. I was alive, I was home. But at first it was hard. At night my brother would sometimes come up, touch me, wake me, "Get up, you're home already." And I would jump up, leap to my feet, thinking, reveille, alarm, battle. It took time before I realized where I was, before I grew used to the silence. Well, at first, when I came back, I was still held by everything that had happened in battle. It felt as though I was still there, in the army, at war. The habit of waking at the slightest noise, expecting a command, always staying alert. For the first few months I still felt the breath of service, discipline, the habit of checking everything, even my stride remained military. Then, gradually, another life pulled me in. Doctors started dragging me through offices, prescribing pills, running endless tests. Constant bustle, one examination after another. It was no battlefield anymore, but another struggle of its own kind, just as hard. At the same time the question arose, what next? I had to think about the future, about entering an institute. That's when I felt caught up in a whirl. The major told me back then, "Why do you need that? Go home." When we moved out to Kirovabat, and you were already due for discharge, what's the point of you still marching on the parade ground? He suggested an easier path. Your education allows it. Go to headquarters, into the finance service. He said, "We'll arrange the papers for you, you'll train at the warrant officer school, come back, and your service will be steady, without mountains and raids." But I had made up my mind firmly. I would go home. I had served 2 years and 4 months, enough. The major, he was from Belgorod himself, and he said straight, "I won't let you go that easily. I've got no replacement." The warrant officer in that post was killed, and no replacement was sent. "Stay, and you'll go with me to the warrant officer's school," they told me. But I stood my ground firmly. If I had wanted a military career, I would have gone to a military academy right away. At that time I even had the chance to enter without exams, thanks to my combat service and recommendations. But I didn't want that. I knew, enough of the army, enough of war. When I returned home, I enrolled in the Faculty of Sports. Before that, I had studied at a finance and economics institute, but I realized that wasn't for me at all. Numbers, reports, paperwork, my heart wasn't in it. But sports were something else entirely. I had always been on the move. I was a candidate for Master of Sports in swimming, had trained in Spartak since childhood. I also did gymnastics and took swimming seriously. Sport had always been a part of me, and it was sport that helped me survive in the army. The mountains are not a pool or a gym, but the stamina and endurance that sport gave me were a huge help. I saw how many soldiers struggled for breath when we had to climb mountains with full gear. Even older, experienced fighters stopped every few steps, gasping for air, while I could go steadily, calmly, without breaking pace. I'd look at them and say, "Come on, give me your pack, I'll help carry it." No, I always tried to move steadily, not to break my breathing. Because in the mountains there's a rule of its own: you can't drink water. If you drink too much, your legs go weak, and you won't make it to the destination. It was proven dozens of times. Soldiers were told, at most, rinse your mouth, moisten your lips, and keep going. Thirst tormented you, your lips cracked, your tongue dried out, but if you drank your fill, that was it, you'd be left sitting on the trail. In the mountains it's like this, step by step, no giving in to weakness. I realized that after everything I went through, I changed. Strangely enough, for the better. I not only matured, but became older in spirit, saw the world differently. The order of things became clear, what matters, and what is just noise. War turns much upside down in your head. It seemed that only yesterday I was a boy, and today my thoughts were already different, as if I had aged 10 years overnight. There were moments better left unremembered, that choke you inside. A couple of times we were standing in line for apartments for young officers. And I caught myself thinking, it could have been different. But I never continue that thought, it beats against the soul like a stone. I didn't choose that road, there was an order, and we went. Orders aren't discussed. War is ruin, the naked truth. Of course, some look for romance in it, heroism, brotherhood, fine words. But in reality there's little romance. Mostly, dirt, sweat, blood, screams, destruction and death. Everything else is decoration in books and films. Yes, of course, there were bright moments too, mutual help, when you stood for each other to the very end, when in the trenches you shared the last can of stew or the last flask of water. But those were little flashes against the background of the fact that war breaks you down. I remember how our guys died, Alexandrov, Mednikov. We lost 5 at once, and that's only those whose names could be spoken. The rest, some badly wounded, some lightly, but no one remained unscathed. The losses were heavy, and still we held on, even though the company was badly battered. The helicopter came to us too late, only when we ourselves were already loading the wounded and the dead. On the battlefield itself, it didn't help us. We sat under fire knowing no rescue was coming. Only later, when the recon company and the 8th Company arrived, did it become a little easier. The 8th came right on time, pulled the brigade together for support, and only then did the situation change. But those who died in the first hours could never be brought back.